Blood is back, baby! The legendary cult horror shooter, the spookiest of the build engine trio that put Monolith on the map, rest in peace, has been given the Nightdive Remaster treatment, and a big thank you to them for providing the review keys. Hold up, didn't Nightdive already remaster this? Indeed they did! Back in 2019, they put out Blood Fresh Supply, a solid but imperfect remaster due to the fact that it was reverse engineered and not based on the original source code. Blood Refresh Supply, however, is built from the ground up from the original source code and aiming for total accuracy. It packs in all the content from Fresh Supply, including new fan-made episodes, better mod support, better multiplayer, remade cutscenes, and is also on consoles for the first time ever: PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and Switch 1 and 2. Indeed, Nightdive's second attempt is aiming to be the definitive version of Blood, although at a bit more of a price. In this video, I'll be touching on the work done in this new remaster. I'll be going over some of the new content added, in particular Marrow, as well as discussing the PlayStation 5 version for you console players. And yes, I will be discussing the pricing. So let's grab our pitchforks, stock up on lighter fluid, and pack some needles, and go live again. Again.
Fresh victims for the ever-growing army of the undead.
So to start off, what's the story here with Nightdive remastering Blood again? Well, in 2019 they put out Blood Fresh Supply, which seemed like a miracle at the time due to the tangled web of Blood ownership. Warner Brothers Games acquired the IP after purchasing Blood's developer Monolith, again, rest in peace, but Atari, formerly Interplay, owned the distribution rights for Blood after purchasing Blood's original publisher, GT Interactive, and this split ownership deadlocked the game being officially re-released for years. So the fact that Atari, Warner Brothers, and Nightdive were able to work this out and get Fresh Supply out was cause for celebration. Unfortunately, Fresh Supply wasn't the definitive version fans were hoping for. On top of launching with bugs and issues, the hardest of hardcore Bloodites were mighty critical of it, citing various inaccuracies from the original. This was because, at the time, Nightdive did not have access to Blood's original source code, something that is a necessity for a faithful remaster, and had to meticulously reverse engineer the game and rebuild it in the Kex engine, a Herculean but imperfect effort. It did ultimately result in a decent version of Blood, especially after some post-launch patches. Even the harshest of critics softened their opinion on it after that, but the consensus would be that Fresh Supply just wasn't quite right, which Nightdive agreed with. This didn't deter Nightdive though. Eventually, they did track down Blood's source code, and following, I assume, a new deal worked out between Atari and WB, re-attempted a Blood remaster building off the original source code, resulting in Blood Refreshed Supply. Basically, this is Nightdive trying to get it better, trying to get it absolutely right. However, the big elephant in the room for this new version is the steep price increase to enjoy it. Where Fresh Supply was initially sold in 2019 for $9.99, Refresh Supply is selling for $29.99, and does not come as a free upgrade for owners of Fresh Supply, which has come as a sore surprise for many, as Nightdive often gives out their remasters for free to owners of their older versions. For example, their remasters of the id Software games. Although Fresh Supply owners were able to pre-order it at a discount of 66.6%. $10, and could get the discount on launch day if they were quick enough. Unfortunately, the discount is completely gone now, and it should be noted that Fresh Supply has been delisted. So I do have mixed feelings on this pricing decision. Now, first off, I in no way think there's a reality where this wouldn't have come out at a higher price. To be frank, this is a far more intensive remaster effort compared to Fresh Supply, especially considering they rebuilt it from the original source code. That's a ton of work, not to mention the hefty amount of content that had to be worked through and bug fixed, along with the new content included and revamped. And in reality, with the rising costs of game development, along with everything else in the world, Nightdive can't afford to put out their remasters as low as $10 anymore. They're a bigger company now and put a lot more effort and quality into their work. These aren't games with a few patches and some texture upgrades. These are extensive remaster efforts, more akin to artistic restorations, that employ a team of professionals to upgrade difficult, decades-old code to modern standards, get that code working smoothly on multiple systems, and at the demand of high definitions and high frame rates, often with updated netcode for their multiplayer. And we can't forget the artists that painstakingly update their visuals. Those people need to be paid fairly and make a living just like you and me. Recent NighDive remasters on average are between $20 and $30. I think that's a fair range for the quality that they put out, and they have been pretty consistent. That all being said, I do think $30 is a bit too high for this remaster. I think $20 would have been the sweet spot, especially when compared to Nightdive's other $30 efforts that have more extensive visual remastering and are from far more obscure engines. But in all fairness, I don't know all the particulars of their development costs, so maybe I'm off on that. But I do feel that Fresh Supply owners should have gotten this for free, or at the very least, the discount should have remained indefinite for them. I think it sends a confusing message, especially since, again, other Nightdive remasters are typically given to owners of their older versions for free. And ultimately, despite the work put into this, the message it sends is, hey, we made it slightly better, give us more money for it. I don't blame some people for being irritated with that. Last thing I'll say on it, I think these decisions largely came from Atari and Warner Brothers and not Nightdive, and I would speculate the final price is related to paying whatever licensing fee WB stipulated for this remaster to be made in the first place. I did reach out to Nightdive PR to get clarification on how the price was set, but they did not get back to me, so take that with a grain of salt. Okay. Let's put the elephant aside now and focus on the remaster itself, because there's a lot of good stuff to cover here, and I'm itching to talk some blood. With Nightdive being able to build off the original source code, the main goal of this new version of Blood was to make it more accurate to the original DOS version. But Nightdive also strove to give it some gameplay tweaks along with the expected quality of life improvements to gameplay and visuals. From what I can tell, the gameplay tweaks were mostly improvements to the enemy AI. In particular, fixing a bug where certain enemies could not hit Caleb if he was crouched, along with fixing their behavior around water and obstacles. Although in Nightdive fashion, you do have the option to turn these tweaks off altogether if you want it to be exactly like the original. Now, admittedly, I know Blood, but I'm not an expert on Blood, or rather an expert that can speak to all the particulars of each version. But I did put some time into its other versions, the original DOS, a few prominent source ports, and Fresh Supply, to see what occurred to me. And I will say, the Refresh Supply version does feel more in line with the original DOS version than Fresh Supply. With Refreshed and DOS, there's a heavier and slightly slower feel to its movement and physics. More tanky. Not sluggish, mind you, just a bit more weighty, but it feels tight, sturdy feeling even. Fresh Supply, however, feels quicker and more glidey, more light, with jumping that seemed springier. Not bad, but not quite the same. The source port and Blood felt more in line with Refreshed and DOS, which isn't too surprising as it goes for absolute accuracy. And another source port, not Blood, which leans more into quality of life improvements, also felt more in line with DOS and Refreshed Supply. And as far as the shooting goes, they all more or less felt identical. But N-Blood and Not Blood felt a hair more responsive to me. Now, what I can confidently comment on was my experience with this remaster, which was fantastic. It just felt so good to play, so satisfying. Every mechanic felt tight and on point to me. I had an absolute blast, and I found myself getting obsessed with Blood all over again. It reaffirmed why it's my favorite of the build engine trinity. I love its horror setting, and I love the creativity Monolith put into it, and how they did certain things differently, like its unique arsenal. It was pretty subversive compared to other shooters at the time, not starting the player off with a pistol, but rather a flare gun that gradually burned away foes, along with wild weapons like the voodoo doll, and really pushing the player to not only master each weapon, but also their alternate fires. And the dynamite. The sweet, sweet dynamite. Truly one of the greatest FPS implements ever. It takes getting a little used to, but once you get the feel for it, the fun is immense and oh so satisfying. It's the weapon of the game. And we can't forget the difficulty. My god, Blood is an ass kicker, especially on its harder settings. It's not crazy to say this game hates you, as it can be outright unfair at times. But even the pain of mastering its well done and extra crispy difficulties has brought me a lot of satisfaction, and probably took some years off my life. The only things that sucked were the things that have always sucked about Blood, like those crazy gargoyles that zoom about like a hummingbird on crack, the annoying pest enemies like the rats and the hands, and the absurd hit scanning of the cultists. Although, to be fair, that does lend to the charm of the evil difficulty. And nothing that some well-placed dynamite can't solve. This is truly one of the great shooters of its time. There's a reason so many boomer shooters reference it and take influence from it today. It's just a rich, excellent gameplay experience with a lot of fun details. Indeed, Blood is a phenomenal experience within refreshed supply. But to be really honest and fair here, Blood is also a great, or was a great experience in fresh supply despite its setbacks. And Blood is also a great experience in its source ports, as well as a great experience in the original DOS form, if you can overlook some age. Look, ultimately, I do believe refreshed is an improvement. I do believe this is the remaster NighDive wanted to make in the first place, and I think if it is crowned the definitive version, it deserves it. But in terms of gameplay, unless you're the hardest of hardcore Bloodites, the improvements here are going to feel minor. And if you're someone who owns fresh supply or plays Blood through one of its source ports and are happy with those versions, it's hard for me to justify you jumping over to refreshed supply with the price that's being asked for it. The benefits to the PC crowd are pretty murky here. However, there is one gaming crowd this new version does benefit, as they've never had the opportunity to play Blood in any form: the console players. For this review, I put a bunch of time into the PlayStation 5 version of the game. This remaster, of course, marks the first time Blood in any form has come to consoles. Putting aside the obvious differences in controls, more on that in a bit, as far as I can tell, the PS5 version is on par with the PC version. The differences I spotted was that the PS5 version didn't have ambient occlusion, and quick save takes a fraction of a second longer, and both those things are very minor. Otherwise, virtually no performance issues, and the visuals look as they should. Now, I didn't have a chance to try the Switch and Xbox versions, so if there's anyone playing on those right now, be sure to let me know in the comments how your experience is. The only awkward aspect of the console port is the controls. Now, for the Blood fans watching who are wondering if this already brutally hard game is harder on controller, well, I have some news for you. It is. Even on mouse and keyboard, Blood is a game that demands a lot of your reflexes and requires you to really get a feel for its particulars, i.e. the dynamite. And on controller, it's tougher for sure, even for the experienced Blood player. But to be clear, when you do get a feel for it, it's still a lot of fun. But while playing on controller is harder, that's not to say the basic controls are bad. Quite the opposite. Blood controls wonderfully on controller, and NighDive provided robust settings to let you tweak it to your preference with sliders for dead zones, smoothing, gyro aiming options, vibration intensity, and the ability to remap every single button. Yes, 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 these options should be in every console first-person shooter, period. Yes, many of these settings were in the fresh supply version too, as it also had controller support. But seeing as console FPS ports can sometimes skimp on the controller settings, I think it's important to highlight. But what is cumbersome, unavoidably cumbersome, is that Blood has more inputs than a controller has buttons for, and depending on the player and what they need from a control scheme, they will likely have to get creative to get certain inputs in there and make some compromises. Like for me, having quick save and quick load mapped is a necessity. Judge all you want, but death is constant in this game and I am not wasting time in the menus. So to do that, I had quick save set to L3 and quick load on D-pad down. I could have done R3, but sometimes I squeeze the sticks when I'm stressed. And I had toggle auto run on R3, which should just be an option in the gameplay menu, but for whatever reason it's absent. Now D-pad down by default is to cycle down through support items, but just having D-pad up for cycling up through them was sufficient enough. FYI, square is to use items, and by default, triangle is set to the med pack. definitely a necessity. Left and right on the D-pad is to cycle through weapons, but since the weapon wheel is mapped to L1, I decided that D-pad left would be better for dynamite quick swap and D-pad right for shotgun quick swap since those are my go-tos. Now, I probably didn't need to explain my control scheme that much, but I'm really just trying to convey the hoops a Blood player might need to go through on the sticks. And to be clear, this is not a criticism towards Nightdive, it's just how the game is. It wasn't designed for a controller. And despite the slight headache, I would rather have the freedom to customize and compromise than them to force me into presets or eliminate certain functions altogether, which other developers might do. Although if I had a suggestion for Nightdive, if possible, please let me map touchpad left and touchpad right. Right now you can only map the touchpad as a single button. That would free up more options right there. One last thing to pick at for controls, the weapon wheel does feel finicky, particularly on console. Sometimes the game didn't register a weapon switch, or didn't register it accurately, making me swap to the wrong weapon. And I really needed to massage that stick in the right spot, to make sure it was working. This was apparent on the PC version too, although not as severe with the mouse, and let's be real, most people aren't going to use the weapon wheel on PC. Along with that too, I wish the weapon wheel also incorporated the support items. This was actually included on Nightdive's recent remaster of Outlaws, and it would have been nice for Blood, particularly on console. Potential control hurdles aside, it's a good port, at least as far as the PS5 version goes. And for the console FPS player who has always wanted to play Blood, you're in for a treat.
Grave robbers.
A big selling point for this remaster is that it will include 2 prominent fan-made episodes as official expansions, Marrow and Death Wish. Unfortunately, Death Wish is not quite ready for the remaster, but it's planned to come in a free update in early 2026. Marrow, however, is available. I had not played Marrow before this remaster, and now having gone through it, I have to say, oh my god, does this expansion slap. So freaking good. Marrow was developed by Nick Paulsmeyer, who recently did some work on the excellent Cultic Chapter 2, and was hired on by Nightdive to not only do additional work on Marrow, but also help with the remaster in the form of bug fixes. Marrow is a continuation of the Blood storyline, picking up after the events of the main campaign. A big thing that sets it apart is its tone and atmosphere. While the original Blood is a horror-themed game, it's pretty comical and silly, more in the vein of Evil Dead 2 Splatstick, which was one of its prime inspirations. Marrow, on the other hand, while not necessarily scary, is not going for giggles, presenting a dark, moody, and outright unnerving tone, meant to heighten tension in the player and flat out mess with their heads. Supported by the expansion's original haunting soundtrack, and it really works to its benefit, making Marrow feel unique compared to the original game, but not straying from what made it so good. The level design is simply incredible, presenting maps that feel true to Blood's world, layered and complex with lots for the player to explore and comb over, but rarely confusing or overstaying their welcome, with creative flourishes and design that at times felt reminiscent of John Romero's work on Sigil, but not nearly as punishing. That's not to say it's without challenge though, quite the opposite. Marrow will happily slap you down with bursts of fiendish challenge. However, compared to the original campaign, these bursts feel more paced out, making for a balanced experience where there is plenty of combat, but plenty of room to breathe. I also appreciate how it subverts a Blood fan's expectations. One level in particular will feel like a tribute to a classic Blood map, until it isn't. And some of them get outright trippy, in a way that would make a Max Payne nightmare sequence blush. Oh, hey Pyman. Marrow is stellar through and through, and I regret not playing it sooner. Stepping into presentation, in terms of quality of life improvements to the visuals and audio, Refresh Supply is basically identical to Fresh Supply, once again offering resolutions up to 4K, unlocked frame rates, along with ambient occlusion, and the expected flavors of anti-aliasing. For the console version, the game is able to run at 4K at 120 frames per second if your TV supports it, something that is becoming the standard with Nightdive console ports. A depth of field effect was added, although as far as I could tell, this only pertained to the weapon wheel. For audio though, there are now 3 flavors of music to choose from: OPL2 for some real MIDI sounding stuff, SC55, and CD audio. Personally, I prefer SC55. In Fresh Supply, you only add SC55 and CD audio to choose from. Past the technical upgrades, this new version of Blood features no graphical enhancements or restoration work. It more or less looks identical to Fresh Supply, although they did add weather effects in the form of rain and snow. Apparently this was a cut feature in the original Blood. Pretty minor if you ask me, but it is a nice touch. The lack of graphical updates might be surprising to some, given that Nightdive has made extensive touch-up work commonplace on their recent remasters, and while I often enjoy their work in that regard, in this case, I'm okay with it. Because I think visually Blood has aged quite well, especially when compared to other 2.5D shooters of its era, due in large part to Monolith creating many of their sprites from digitized models, which I think lent them greater believable detail and personality. Even today. There's also a plethora of voxels used throughout the game, which are beautifully done and lend a ton of detail to the maps. I'm a sucker for voxels. And the maps themselves are wonderfully realized. Much like its build engine siblings, Monolith really pushed to make Blood's levels feel like actual tangible places, and the attention to detail is outstanding, even for a game of its age. Sure, maybe Nightdive could have sharpened up the textures and weapon models, but again, I think those hold up really well. They're beautifully drawn with smart color work that conveys a sense of depth and, well, texture. And I think the pixelation of them adds to the game's gritty, rotten atmosphere. And these qualities are carried over and pushed further with the Marrow add-on. Seriously, that campaign is so freaking good and it is beautiful. Sometimes restraint is the better choice, and Nightdive made the better choice here.
I disavow you all.
What?
Where Nightdive did do a visual revamp was with the cutscenes. Blood's original cutscenes by today's standards are very rough. They've aged about as well as milk sitting out in the sun. The CG and animation is simplistic and outright janky. Granted, they were made in 1997, and CG cutscenes in video games around this time ran the gamut of okay looking to hideous. But Blood's cutscenes were of their era, and putting aside the aged visuals, I would say the cinematography and atmosphere of them has held up over the years. I mean, there's some shots in these cinematics that have become iconic in the retro shooter community. Like this shot right here. Whenever I think of Caleb, I think of this shot. It's just awesome looking, great use of a Dutch angle. It does make sense that Nightdive would strive to update these though. 1, to make them less of an eyesore, and 2, to render them at modern resolutions. The original cutscenes were rendered at a very small resolution, which has only made them look worse over time. And thus they recreated all the visuals, the models, the animations, effects, and lighting, matching them as close as possible to the originals, although there are some tweaks to the animation and camera work here and there. They also kept the original audio, using it as a base. I can confirm this because I was able to match the audio waveforms of the new and old versions in my editing software. It's a commendable effort, they clearly put a lot of work into it, and their hearts were in the right place. But I hate to say it, these don't really work for me. While they are technically improved, the problem for me is that Nightdive tried to strike this balance between staying really faithful to the original cinematics, like really faithful, and visually improving them, and the results just look odd and are more distracting than anything. The thing is, when Monolith made these, they were trying to make the best cinematics they could with the resources they had and the technical limitations of the time. As I said, they were of their era and should be looked at through that lens. But when you attempt to add more modern-looking assets to primitive 1997 animations, it just looks wonky and awkward. And some of the new visuals come off as unpolished. Some of the textures have pixelation to them, which maybe was deliberate to give them a more retro feel, but it comes off as a mistake. In all fairness, some of it doesn't look too bad. I think some of the more iconic shots came out looking decent. But overall, I'm not sure who these are for, because I feel like a lot of Blood fans will be underwhelmed by these, or just think they're plain weird, and a new player is just gonna feel like they're bad cutscenes. Personally, I think it would have been better if Nightdive completely reimagined these as modern-looking 2025 cutscenes. Stay in line with the shots and feel of the original, but take a few liberties, add some stuff, actually modernize them, and really make them look beautiful, or just left them alone entirely. The last thing I'll mention, and this really surprised me, but there's no option to switch back to the original cutscenes or even view them, like in the Nightdive Vault. This is unfortunate because I'm certain some players will prefer to have the old cutscenes instead, and Nightdive tends to have an archival attitude to their remasters, making sure all the original assets are accessible and preserved. I would urge them to include the original cinematics in a future update. Blood Refresh Supply brings back a gaming classic in beautiful fashion, coupling it with an incredible expansion in the form of Marrow, and finally providing console players with a solid version to kick their asses. For me, the only negatives are the new cutscenes that didn't quite hit the mark, along with its pricing and the circumstances around it. To summarize my recommendations, if you're a console FPS player who loves retro shooters and have been itching to play Blood, absolutely give this a go. For the PC crowd though, if you're a Blood fan who wants to play this and doesn't mind paying a little more, go for it. It's unlikely you'll be disappointed. Although it's never a bad idea to hold off for a sale if you're unsure. But if you're a Blood fan who is happy with Fresh Supply or your source port of choice, stick with those versions. There's no reason for you to buy this. And of course, if you're someone who has never played Blood and loves the boomer shooter scene, it's definitely worth your time to play Blood, in whatever form makes the most sense to you, and experience the title that all the boom shoots worship. But that's it for me. What are your thoughts on Blood Refresh Supply? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, subscribe, share, and smack that bell. It's a huge help for the algorithm and getting my videos seen by more people. If you want to join my Discord, the link is down below, along with my affiliate links. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.